If you had to think of a story or show where the plot doesn't really matter, what would come to mind first? Maybe a sitcom or cartoon? Probably something lighthearted and episodic. But what about a grand fantasy adventure? Could you imagine Lord of the Rings if Frodo didn't have to take the ring to Mordor? Or Avatar: The Last Airbender if Aang didn't have to save the world? What would a fantasy story without an important A-plot look like? My name is Pei, and today we're talking about how Frieren's main storyline isn't very important, and somehow that makes it better. I understand that this is a pretty big claim. I need to clarify that number one, I am not saying that the A-plot in Frieren is poorly written or bad. And number two, I'm not saying Frieren without any A-plot would be good. I think it provides incredibly important direction. A shorthand of what I'm arguing is that Frieren's A-plot is replaceable. And in totally embracing the cliche, what makes Frieren special is the journey, not the destination. So let's start first with defining what an A-plot is. You might be more familiar with the sister term B-plot, which refers to a sub-story going on that's not directly related to the main plotline, like Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli's adventure, which kind of shows what the A-plot is going to be, the main storyline. And important main A-plots are almost synonymous with fantasy adventures, especially serial shows where the episodes tie into a bigger plot line. If you were to think of shows without a major A-plot, you'd probably think a lot of sitcoms. While there can be change and character growth, there tends not to be one overarching plot line. But even sitcoms sometimes have that A-plot, like How I Met Your Mother, it's in the title. Or Friends, where they're friends, that one doesn't work as well. And while some sitcoms don't have A-plots, I rarely, if ever, see a fantasy story that doesn't. And to be fair, Frieren does have an A-plot, it's just not as important as the rest of the show. Because to some degree, I think Frieren's A-plot is highly replaceable. So what is that A-plot? If we were to simplify, Fern and Frieren are looking for a land that's long forgotten where the living have a chance to talk with the dead. It provides direction, it ties nicely into the themes of the story, and it allows Frieren to retrace the steps of her previous journey. But there's lots of ways you could do that, especially in a way that creates more pressing conflict. And most stories would need that conflict to keep audiences engaged. There's this popular literary device that I'm going to refer to as the 5 elements of storytelling. You're likely familiar with all 5: plot, character, conflict, setting, and theme. And I think you can look at any story and rank those 5 elements in order of importance. Like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, I would argue that the setting and characters are most important, and Jaws, which feels solely built around the conflict. So which element is most important to Frieren? I think you could make an argument for multiple different orders, but I think there would be a couple uniformities. Near the top would be theme, character, and setting, and near the bottom would be conflict and probably plot. And sometimes stories even completely abandon one of the 5 elements, but I'm not saying that Frieren does that. I'm arguing that Frieren prioritizes conflict so much less than other stories. There's no looming threat against the world, there's no big bad. Or better said, there was one that died at the start of the story. The characters are rarely ever in serious danger. Most of the conflict in this story is minor forms of disagreement between the party, which is what you might expect from a character drama, not a fantasy adventure. Because other fantasy stories almost always don't just have high-stakes conflict, they're built around it. Now, I'm not arguing Frieren is better because they're not conforming to standards. I just think it's interesting, because they have to do something well if they're jumping away from what's so established. So part of the reason I'm arguing that Frieren's A-plot is interchangeable is because I think in most other fantasy stories, they would have had a different A-plot. They would have had something like a remnant of the Demon King actually survived and he might come back, so they have to go destroy it before he arises. Or one of the party members is suddenly faced with a severe illness that they have to go cure. Something that creates stakes. But I actually think that those 2 A-plots would undermine what I talked about in the 4th video of this series. 2 weeks ago, I made a video talking about how Frieren's entire season is promised in 3 episodes. In the comments, some people made some pretty good arguments that it was actually the first 4 episodes that promised the season. People pointed out the fact that they released the first 4 episodes all together. They also pointed out that the main plotline was introduced in the 4th episode. How could a series be promised when it's not introducing what is theoretically the most important plotline? But I stand by my take because I don't think that the main plotline is a significant part of what makes the story special. And I think an interesting and compelling example of that is analyzing the second half of episode 4 when they introduce the A-plot. It all starts with the old adventuring party standing next to Eisen and a couple dwarven graves. There's a beautiful exchange exploring the idea that belief can be inherently optimistic. Independent of whether or not it's true, believing in something can help with the hardships of loss. And 80 years later, we see Eisen still practicing those habits, demonstrating the way that sentiment had resonated with him and how his past relationships continue to impact him. A parallel to the lesson Frieren is learning. And then Frieren shows up and nonchalantly states that they're here to hang out. This dialogue is a really interesting exploration of the same point that's been hammered across the first 3 episodes, the challenges of a long life. Frieren's come to Eisen with the intention of helping, starting to showcase all the ways she's begun to change. That'll be a consistent thing in this episode. Once again, Frieren's favor to Eisen is used against her. They search for and find one of the only legitimate tomes left by the great mage Flamma, foreshadowed earlier in this episode when they were cleaning the beach. This little adventure that the 3 go on searching for Flamma's last resting place is actually incredibly dense, subtly reiterating so many points that I've talked about in my previous videos. For example, the way Frieren and Fern clap as Eisen lifts this boulder, or the callback to how Eisen loves sour grapes and it's one of Frieren's odd spells she's learned, or Fern's grumpy face when she finds out that it might take them a while to actually find this resting place, or the way she hypes herself up to ask them to be a little bit timely, and also the way Frieren values Fern's time and Eisen notices that it's out of character for her. All of these things are what makes Frieren the show so special. So many of these episodes explore the characters as they grow and develop their relationships, exploring this fantastic, beautiful, magical world on their little meandering adventures. While the A-plot is great and serves the story well, it feels like it's not the reason I love this show. They could never reach this theoretical goal, and I think it wouldn't impact much. So much of this story is about how the little things play out, built on a foundation of outstanding characters and relationships. It's also executed so well I don't really care about the main plot. I'm always more occupied by what's going on in the moment. And that's part of the reason I love this show so much. I've never seen something like that done before. It's so singular in such a saturated market. And man, if it wasn't built off of such a remarkable foundation of execution, I'm not sure this show would have worked. Because creating a fantasy story where the A-plot is unimportant and then making it remarkable seems pretty hard. But Frieren did it really, really well. Thanks. If you enjoyed this video, consider watching the rest of the other 5 I made in the series so far, or come back next week for another one. If you want to support me or this series, consider going to the Patreon that I have linked in my description. I have a couple exclusive video essays up now. These videos seem to be doing pretty well, and that's always fun. So, thanks again, and I'll see you next week.